Hello, dear students. Let us discuss a new chapter today. Chapter number 2, The Address. Class 11, English, Snapshots, Textbook. The chapter is written by Margot Minko. Let us talk about the introduction first. The story is about the human predicament, or we can say dilemma, that follows the pre-war and post-war period. Mrs. S., who was a Jew and was a rich lady. So here we come to know about the first character of this story, Mrs. S. Whereas there is one more lady who is Mrs. Darling. She was a non-Jew, and the girl, the daughter of Mrs. S., had lost her house and her mother during the war. And now she had decided to come back to take her possessions from Mrs. Darling, an acquaintance whose address was given by her mother years ago. When she reached the house, the woman treated her with a very cold reception and didn't let her into the house. The girl decided to go back anyway, and then she met her daughter, who let her in and told her to wait inside. When she saw all the possessions in front of her, she couldn't connect with them and decided to leave the house. Let us see the summary in nutshell. After ringing the doorbell of Mrs. Darling, who lived at number 46 Marconi Street, the protagonist was given a cold reception, and Mrs. Darling took much time to recognize her. Mrs. Darling had thought everyone in the protagonist family was dead and asked if anyone else had come along with her. Mrs. Darling refused to let the protagonist inside her home and told her to come back sometime later. The protagonist recognized her mother's green cardigan, a woolen sweater, which Mrs. Darling was wearing. She decided to go back to the train station and thought about her mother and how she told about Mrs. Darling, who was an acquaintance of hers. During the war, Mrs. Darling would visit their house and take their possessions with her, as she didn't want them to get lost if they ever left the place. Mrs. Darling had a broad back. The protagonist decided to go to Mrs. Darling's home to get back their belongings. When she rang the bell, Mrs. Darling's daughter answered the door. She let her in and asked her to wait in the living room. When they were crossing the passage, the protagonist noticed their Hanukkah candle stand that they had never used because it had been unmanageable. When she reached the living room, she was horrified as she saw all her mother's things that were arranged in a tasteless manner. The furniture was ugly and the room had a muggy smell, and it made her disinterested and she wanted to leave the place. Mrs. Darling's daughter offered her a cup of tea, and the protagonist noticed the old tablecloth that had a burn mark on it. When the girl was showing her the silver fork and spoons that actually belonged to the protagonist, she jumped up and walked out of the house. She decided not to visit the place again, as it brought back memories of the past, and hence she decided to forget the address. So this was the summary in short. Now let us talk about the chapter in details. The protagonist, the daughter of Mrs. S., asked the woman, who is a woman, to whom she is talking? It is Mrs. Darling. So Mrs. Darling, the woman, was standing at the door if she still knew her. As if the protagonist asked the woman standing at the door if she still knew her. The protagonist is asking whether she knows her, whether the lady knows her. The lady had opened the door a little. The protagonist came closer to the door and stood there. Now see, the lady is not willing to take the girl inside the house, but she is expecting, and that's why she is standing there waiting for her. The woman responded negatively, and the protagonist still gave her introduction. Okay, the lady was not showing any courtesy. She was responding negatively. She was not willing to accept her. She had given her a very cold response. But the protagonist thought that she must not be, she must not recognize her. She cannot remember things, and that's why she is taking time. So she continued and she gave her introduction. She said she was Mrs. S.'s daughter. The woman had held the door tightly as she didn't want her to enter the house. Now, what can be the reason? Why is she doing so? She kept staring at the protagonist though she couldn't recognize her. Now, whether she cannot recognize her, or is there something else behind that? Let us talk about it. The protagonist thought maybe she had come to the wrong house. The girl felt that as the lady is not able to recognize me, it can happen because I have reached at a very wrong place or wrong address. She had seen the woman only for a short time years ago. So if I don't know, or if I can't remember the face of the woman, as I just saw her for a very short time, and that also very long back, okay, and so can be the confusion that I have reached at a wrong place. The woman who answered the door stepped aside and let go of the door. Okay, she was not bothered that the door is getting closed and somebody is waiting outside. The protagonist recognized her mother's green knitted cardigan that the woman was wearing. So this was the clue. She got the idea that she is not at a wrong place. The wooden buttons had become pale because of washing. The woman noticed the protagonist looking at the cardigan. The lady observed that the girl is looking at this cardigan, and then she hid behind the door. Now the protagonist knew. She became so sure that she had come to the right house. The protagonist asked the woman about her mother. The woman asked her if she had come back. She replied only to her, and no one else came with her. Okay, so when the lady asked that who all have come here, okay, she asked about her mother. The protagonist asked her about her mother, and the woman was also asking her a few questions. And when she got the reply, she came to know that it is the only one person, and that is this daughter who has returned back. The woman opened the door and a passage was behind her. A stale smell occurred all over. The woman told her that she could not do anything for her. The protagonist tried to tell her that she had come from far place on the train just to talk to her. So the protagonist felt that if I tell her the fact or the genuine reasons, she may allow the girl to get inside. She may give some time, she may talk to her. That's why she is telling all these things to that lady. The woman told her it is not convenient to talk right now, though she came to know that the girl has traveled a long distance, but still she says she is rather giving an excuse. What she says, that it is not convenient to talk right now, and asked her to come back later. The woman closed the door as she didn't want anyone to get disturbed in the house. The protagonist was still standing on the step. She saw a curtain moving on the window B. Now, what does this indicate? It shows that someone was there who was staring at her from inside the house. And who can it be? It can be the lady herself. She thought it was nothing, as the woman would have told her. Her mother was surprised that she noticed the changes a little later. It was that time when she told her about this woman, Mrs. Darling. She was an old contact of hers whom she hadn't seen for years. Suddenly, she came to visit her, and since then, they had been in regular contact. The protagonist looked at the number plate again. It said number 46. Darling was written on the plate on white enamel. As she was going back to the station, she was thinking about her mother who gave her the address. It was the first half of the war. She was home for a few days and suddenly it struck her that the room was different now. Various things were missing. Her mother told her that whenever that woman came to visit her, she took something from the house with her. Table silvers, antique plates, and she had trouble over carrying the large vase. Okay, so this is how she was carrying so many things with her. She told her that the cramp in her bag came from the crockery as she was carrying so many things. Her mother shook her head in sorrow. The woman kept telling the protagonist's mother that she wanted to save her precious things and that's why she is taking all of them. If they had to leave the place, the way the lady Mrs. Darling tried to convince her mother, what did she say? Or what would she say? If they had to leave the place someday, what will happen? They would lose everything. And that's why I'm carrying all these things, or that's why she told them that she was carrying all those things. She asked her mother if she really wanted her to take all the things with her. Her mother replied that even if she didn't, it would be an insult to ask her not to. She was going out with a risk herself, a suitcase full of items. Okay, actually the lady herself was in risk when she was carrying all those things. Her mother noticed that she wasn't convinced and looked at her critically. After that day, they never talked about the incident again. She reached the station without noticing any details on the way because she didn't want to get all those memories back. She had lived the life there and now she had lost the people, she had lost the family members, and so she is disinterested to have those all things and all those memories back. She passed the familiar things after the war for the first time. After the war, it was her first time when she is passing through or passing by the ways and the things, okay, where she once was staying or living with those things. She didn't want to upset herself with the familiar sights of houses and streets that reminded her of all the precious times. Back in the time she saw Mrs. Darling in person a day after her mother told her daughter about her. Okay, what do we get from this point? Back in the time she saw Mrs. Darling in person a day after her mother told her daughter about her. Okay, she woke up late that morning, and as she was going downstairs, she saw the lady